Welcome to the first interview episode of Season 8 of the Apollo Papyrus Podcast. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. My interview guest for this episode is the Managing Director for the artificial intelligence consulting firm Intelligencia. As an author, he has written the novel The Dead Chip Syndicate, as well as a pair of nonfiction book series about predictive analysis and artificial intelligence. His name is Andrew Pearson, and my interview with Andrew will follow the teleportation sound. Andrew Pearson, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus Podcast.
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
You were born in Pakistan, grew up in Singapore, were educated in the United Kingdom and the United States, and now live in Hong Kong. How did each place you've lived in influence you as a person?
Sure. I actually live in Macau now, but we're about an hour away from Hong Kong. But I did, when I first moved out here, I did move to Hong Kong. So I had a very interesting childhood, obviously, from living in all those different places. And my mother's English and my father's American. So that's kind of, they met, I think, in Spain. And then he was working in Pakistan, not for the military, the U.S. military, but building an air base in Pakistan. But then I was about 2 years old when I left, so I don't remember too much about it. I do remember Singapore, and Singapore in the early 70s was a fascinating place to grow up in. It was obviously still is a U.S. base, so there was quite a big American and English presence there, obviously former English colony. But it had, this fantastic Chinese element as well. And if you know anything about Singapore, it's probably, jokingly, they say it's the most functional dictatorship in the world, but it does have an element, obviously, of freedom there. And obviously it has enormous success. So unfortunately, I didn't learn any other languages while I was there, but kind of the Asian aspect always stayed with me. And I think when I moved back out here to Asia, it was very much with the idea of having grown up here and being very comfortable in this part of the world. When I was 11, my parents sent me off to boarding school. My mom got the English boarding school first, and then the American father, sent us off to U.S. to finish off high school in 16 and 17. So, and then I went off to college. But England was fantastic, went to boarding school there, so got a great education. And, was a pretty good athlete, so I loved playing soccer. Still follow the English football team to my pain. And then we moved to America, and it was interesting because living in England, I had an American accent from living in an American, community and an American environment in Singapore. And then I got a lot of stick from being American when I was in England. And then from England, I went to America. And at that point, I had developed a British accent. And, I don't know, most Americans love the British accent. So it became a very popular kid at that point. But I was always a writer, so England's a great place to get an education if you want to learn about the classics, and you're quoting Shakespeare at 12 and 13, reading stuff like Chaucer, which obviously is very difficult, but really getting an early education in the classics. And then America, I came and went to boarding school in Virginia, but ended up in LA and was optioning books and turning them into screenplays and trying to get them made. Got close in many cases, got directors attached to most of those projects, but the film business is the toughest business in the world, so it's very hard to get something over the line. So, and then I was offered an opportunity to run a software business out here in Asia, and just jumped on it. And when I did, I started, kind of keeping an eye out for interesting ideas that could be screenplays or novels. And then Macau is just this wonderfully quirky, weird, half Chinese, half Portuguese, all irreverent. And obviously the casino business is here, so you've got a lot of money flowing in and out, and shady characters, interesting situations, which did end up in the book. So there's a long-winded way to say it was a great childhood and a great education.
I apologize for incorrectly claiming you currently live in Hong Kong. You live in Macau, and I apologize for that.
Not at all. Not at all.
Feel free to tell our listeners more about yourself.
Sure. So currently I run a AI software consulting company in Macau. I have some employees in the Philippines and one down in Australia as well. We utilize every now and then. But basically, I live in Macau, which is the casino capital of the world, because it's the only place in China that one can gamble basically on casino games. And the fascinating element of my job is I'm partnered with quite a lot of the big software companies, and I see a lot of interesting AI technology being developed, and that did end up in my book quite a bit. But I kind of see what's on the cutting edge, and I actually wrote a couple of books about AI in the marketing industry and the casino industry and the sports betting industry, probably about 5 or 6 years ago now. So it was right when AI was really kind of exploding, right after big data, that term exploded. Then AI came along. I kind of recognized that, oh, this is probably going to be hot. So I wrote a few books on it, and we work with the casinos and a few sports books. So it's a very interesting industry. A lot of fun as long as you're not losing, your shirt. But obviously, ultimately, it's all about entertainment. Obviously, the money's important, but that's the way they sell it. Basically, people do have a certain amount of money that they can use to go to concerts or go to a casino. So, but culturally, it's a fascinating place, because whereas Hong Kong belonged to the Brits for about 99 plus years, Portugal controlled Macau for 500 years. So you have all this wonderful Portuguese architecture, all these tiled streets and statues to famous Portuguese poets, and an old fort on top of the hill, and then Chinese kind of everywhere, So, but you have a lot of leftover Portuguese people who are, still sending their kids to Portuguese schools, still learning Portuguese. It's the official languages here are Portuguese and Chinese. You take the bus, you're going to hear, languages. You'll hear English, you'll hear Cantonese, you'll hear Mandarin, you'll hear Cantonese, and you'll also hear a little bit of Portuguese as well. So, so it's a very interesting place. And obviously we have China right next door, which is a whole other world unto itself as well. So a whole interesting, culturally fascinating, and obviously 5,000 years of history. So a lot of interesting things to see over there as well. This is the area where the Opium War, maybe not was fought, but it's a little further upstream. So there's a lot of interesting history here, and it kind of they do embrace history here now, which is kind of nice, and obviously in Hong Kong as well. A little less in China, but they are getting better there now. So yeah, it's been a great 12 years since I moved out here, and then I do get to travel to the Philippines quite a bit, which I do thoroughly enjoy. It's a great country, wonderful people. Malaysia as well is a fascinating place. And then, if you travel in this part of the world, you just know the food is extraordinary, because it's all so different, and all from, Indian flavors, Malay flavors, Singapore, and then obviously a lot of the Chinese element as well. So it's then Thailand as well, which is not too far from here as well. So yeah, it's kind of like an interesting melting pot of just wonderful people and interesting opportunities as well. As an American coming into this part of the world, they really see you as someone who technologically is a bit more sophisticated than they are. So they're very interested in what to say, and so I have ended up on quite a few panels, and those are quite interesting as well. So yeah, totally enjoyable, and miss America a little bit, but not that much.
You've written a novel called The Dead Chip Syndicate. Without spoiling too much of it, what is it about?
Sure, I'll give you a quick. So I worked in the film industry for a while, and I actually did adapt this into a screenplay as well. But I'll give you the log line really quick. So when an expat moves to Macau to run his twin brother's AI company, he falls under the influence of a charismatic casino owner who recruits him to sell a crypto coin to the Chinese elite. But he soon discovers he's the dupe in a huge money laundering scheme that might be orchestrated by his treacherous twin. So a lot of it is based on true events. And Macau has a very interesting history because if you go back about 20 plus years, there were a lot of, we call them triads out here, but basically mobsters. So there were a bunch of mobsters basically fighting over territory and fighting over the sins you have in places like Las Vegas, basically gambling, loan sharking, prostitution, drugs. So they were kind of all fighting over that. And then the government decided it wanted to open up and invite the big American and Australian casino companies to Macau so it could become an international destination. So they made a deal with the mobs basically and said, look, we'll let you create junket rooms, which are rooms where high roller Chinese gamblers come, play, and then you don't have to fight over the drugs and the prostitution and any of that. So they basically got rid of all of that criminal element overnight and basically turned all of these people into junket rooms where they would extend credit to gamblers who might, go on a losing streak. And then basically they would have these rooms inside the casinos. So the casinos provided all the dealers, chips, basically everything they needed for the gambling part of the business. And then if they had customers or gamblers who didn't quite pay their bills and their debts, then that would be settled by the mobs, the triads inside China. So it's kind of like a way for the American and Chinese casino operators to keep their hands clean. And it was a nice way to basically stop the triad members and the mobsters from blowing each other up, which they weren't previously doing. So it's kind of a wonderful social experiment. And then we had one mobster who decided he wanted to make a movie about himself. So he ends up making a movie about himself, and it was actually released and it's on YouTube. It's called Casino. Obviously, very different from the American Casino. But he basically made a movie about himself and a movie about himself. He shut down a bridge at one point for the scene in which he kills a informant. And then I read about that and I thought, this would be interesting if I create a story about an American who comes to Macau, gets involved with another. We're not sure if he's a mobster or not. He's got an interesting history, but he does own a junket room. So he wants an American, the main character who was a failed screenwriter in LA. He moves to Macau to run his twin brother's AI software company, and then Cash Chiang, who's he's a pompadour-topped Johnny Cash-loving casino operator, asks our main character basically to write his story. And it's really a way to document all the people who are going in and out of his casino high roller rooms to basically document where all of the questionable money flowing in from China has come and where it's gone to. So it's kind of, he's basically ensuring that should anything untoward happen to him, then he'll have enough documentation to ensure his safety because he knows where all the bodies are buried and all the money, where all the money has gone into, what bank accounts in Switzerland they've gone into. So then, of course, as in any thriller, someone ends up getting in trouble in Cash's high roller room. A problem gambler takes out a loan from a loan shark who then ends up, the gambler's unable to pay the loan shark back, so he ends up basically getting beaten. And this is actually based on a true event as well. So when the loan sharkers are beating up this man, they're live streaming the beating to the family in China, basically trying to ensure that the family pays back the loan, and they end up beating him too far and end up killing him. So then in the Dead Chip Syndicate, that's the reason why Cash Chiang is arrested, and then he's put on trial for the murder of the problem gambler because it was in his VIP junket room. And then basically he has to figure out a way to get out of Macau, and he does that through I won't give too much more away, but through machinations and through some money, a ship filled with money that has to be sailed from Zhuhai, which is right across the border from Macau to Cebu, Philippines, and so there's a touch of COVID there too, and yeah, so it's but it's also about brothers and twin brothers and betrayals and family betrayals and finding family in other places and a woman as well. Our main character falls in love with Vivian, who who also works for cash, but we're not sure whether he can trust her or not. But as these books and films tend to have, where we can't trust any of the main characters. So, but it was fun to write. It's obviously filled with a lot of truthful events that I adapted into more, basically more dramatic or more personal. And yeah, so it was a lot of fun to write. It was my first book, and the reviews actually were quite good. So I was very proud to be. Actually, I was compared to a book by Lawrence Osborne named "The Ballad of a Small Player," which is actually a book that's set in Macau about an Englishman who comes here and stole some money and comes to Macau and gambles it away and gets involved with people in Macau. But they're actually shooting the movie right now, which is kind of interesting. And but yeah, so my book was compared to that, and I compare it also to a lot of people love the dialogue, so I'm a big fan of Elmore Leonard, so I try to keep that kind of liveliness going. Lawrence Shames is another author I like a lot, and I actually optioned one of his novels many years ago. Steve Lopez, if anyone's familiar with him, he actually writes for the LA Times, columnist, and he wrote a couple of books. One was called The Sunday Macaroni Club, which I also optioned a few years ago. And so very, kind of playful with the dialogue and clever. And if you've seen that show, the Elmore Leonard one, it'll come to me later, probably, I'm sure. But Raylan Givens, I think is his name. Anyway, yeah. So it was a lot of fun to write. It took a couple of years, and business kind of got very quiet during COVID. So I kind of, took the time, 18 months, to basically write a novel. And because we weren't allowed out of Macau without coming back in and doing a 2 or 3 week quarantine. So I was pretty much here the whole time, and basically decided why not. It's a story I wanted to tell, and now I've got a bit of time to do it. And the great part of it was I was able to find a publisher pretty quickly once it was complete, and once I was shopping it around. I think it was about the 5th publisher that I approached was like, "Oh yeah, let's do this." So, which was nice because I'd been working in the film industry for many years and pretty much striking out on trying to get an agent on that front.
You mentioned some of the screenplay adaptations for novels that you've written. What are the biggest differences between writing a novel and writing a screenplay adaptation for one?
So I started actually, the first script that I did was an adaptation of a novel by Maria Fluke. And the great thing about adapting a novel is you've got the characters, you've got the plot, you've got the setting, you've obviously got the ending in most cases too, because most people do end up keeping, especially that aspect of a novel. But basically, when you're writing a book, you do want to write a lot of backstory for these characters, or at least one of the characters, the character in my book, the main character Anthony, is basically me. Obviously some other elements to him, but like me, he's an American who moves to Macau, and he's got a previous history of writing screenplays and very bitter about his experience. So that all came through, but when you write a novel, it's quite, I wouldn't say, when you write a screenplay, it's incredibly structured. A screenplay, basically you're writing 120 pages, 90 to 120 pages. And every single, it's all in present tense. So as you're reading it, things are happening on the screen as you read across the page. So you don't have the ability to jump around in past, present, future the way you do in the book. You don't have the way to go, you can't go into a character's mind as easily as you can go into a book. I actually prefer writing books now because it's, I'm a bit of a wordsmith and I love putting together a beautiful sentence. And then I've had quite a few readers complain, this is too prosy when I'm writing screenplays. And, there are ways where, as you do know a good screenwriter when you read a script, and there are elements of, you have to capture the essence or the soul of the person very, very quickly. Like there was an interesting video I watched on YouTube recently, and they were describing one of the characters were basically, it was actually about the movie, the Stephen King one, the Shawshank Redemption. And there's a character in it, basically he pissed ice. It was like, this man is so cold that, he urinates ice. And it was basically, in a screen, Stephen King probably spent a paragraph describing this man, as being cold in multiple different ways. But the screenwriter had to just basically put it out in a sentence. So, it's almost poetic in some ways. And there are some things when I am writing screenplays, it's like you do have to, in a sentence, capture kind of what you would capture within a paragraph in a book. But it's not like taking elements of that paragraph. It's actually understanding the character on a deeper level, understanding elements of that character that you may not even put in the paragraph. So it's an economy of words, but it's also difficult I would say it's a much more difficult medium to work in. Not even thinking about trying to get it made. You don't have the latitude to really go down some, prose, spending some time to really get into the long history of someone. Like I have seen in a book where it's several pages and it's basically about some childhood experience the two twins have, where one doesn't get into a school that, it's like two boarding schools and you have to pass an examination to get into the next school. And one of the twins doesn't pass. So he's left behind. And, in the book, it was several pages. And then in the script, it was like, I had to figure out where I was going to put that in the script. And then there's one moment where the main character dives off a boat because he's worried about COVID. So he's kind of cleansing himself off of COVID, and then he jumps into the water. And that's when we basically go back, do the flashback to the, 20, 30 years previous to the boarding schools. So, and then a lot of what you have to do, obviously the dialogue has to become considerably shorter. So you don't have the ability to, go in long-winded, beautiful, tangential, Oscar Wildean cleverness. It's like some bantering is good, but you don't want to labor the point. It's like movies are incredibly expensive to make. Anytime you write a script, you're asking people to give you tens of millions of dollars. So you don't have the ability to, and, in some ways that's good, but, you don't want to pound people over the head with the idea. And you want to, what I try to do with dialogue is try to make it very musical. So very much Aaron Sorkin, he talks about how, he's trying to make his dialogue sound like music. So I try to do that as well, because I think it makes it better to listen to in the ear. But there are ways where, the book can be, a chapter of 10 pages talking about, there's a scene actually in the book where, it's a detailed discussion of the film business in Macau. And, in the book, it was just, you have a page and a half to really, and I don't even know if that she had made it in the final draft, but basically you have a few pages. You have one page, which is considerably less than even a page in a book. So, and then it's also the last point would be it's all visual. How are you saying something with a visual image that you would say in a page in a book? There's a very famous, if you go back to Citizen Kane and the way, and then it's just basically utilizing the whole way of blocking people and getting people into and out of scenes. So yeah, it's two completely different mediums, but both of them are fascinating in their own right. So yeah.
You've written two series of nonfiction books, the predictive series and the artificial intelligence series. Without spoiling too much of each of your nonfiction series, what are each of them about?
So the predictive series the AI series is kind of a newer version of the predictive series. So the predictive series was all about how predictive analytic technology would be used in industries like casino industry, the sports betting industry. I did the airline industry, I did the retail industry. So it's basically explaining how you would go about building specific models to, in many cases, it's customer service, or not customer service, more like customer intelligence models, a lot of marketing stuff. So like how, basic ones are customer segmentation, and then we move into logistic regression, and then all the way up to prescriptive analytics, where you're basically looking at demand forecasting. So a lot of casinos will be looking at their table games and saying, what's the price that I should be? What are the minimum price for hands at the table, the baccarat table or the blackjack table at 9 p.m. on a Saturday night? So here, basically, if you walk into a casino at 10 a.m. in the morning on a Monday, the price will be probably a third of what it will be or maybe even a tenth of what it would be when it gets really busy. So the casinos are trying to figure out, if I fill this seat, how much should I charge? Because if it's a $10 minimum, the casino has to pay the same price for the dealer. But if it's $100 minimum, it's going to make not 10 times as much, but considerably more than it will make for $10. And it's just like hotel rooms. Like we look at hotels and we look at airlines. What price do they sell the seat at? So they're looking at demand and looking at supply, and then they're looking at historical. How busy was the casino this time last year? Do we have a special? In America, a lot of it is around sporting events, right? So that was kind of the predictive one. And then 5 years later, well, maybe a few years later, I kind of recognized that AI is everywhere. And AI is really just, higher end analytics, let's say. So, and obviously there's stuff like machine learning, deep learning. And, we're obviously now going off a whole new tangent with large language models and things like ChatGPT or Midjourney and all of these text to image tools. But the AI casino, the AI sportsbook, the AI hotelier is really basically breaking down all of the similar analytics in the predictive book. So, and then it was basically just taking it and adding machine learning, deep learning elements to the book.
Okay. Are all your books self-published, traditionally published, or hybrid published, or did you use more than one method?
More than one method. All of the nonfiction books, those are self-published, and then the Dead Chip Syndicate was traditionally published.
You've also written columns on technology-related topics. How many such columns have you written, and what are a few specific topics you've written columns about?
Sure. So I write for a peer-reviewed journal, a few of them. One is called the Journal of Digital and Social Media Marketing. And I've done a lot of topics recently on generative AI. So how generative AI can be used in the marketing realm. Um, if you know anything about Midjourney or ChatGPT, obviously is quite known now. So it's kind of like, how are those tools used? How can they be used by marketers? The other ones I've done are also like how analytics can be used by marketers. And then I did a couple that were kind of like social media. One was about social media in China and how, because China has its own, a lot of social media platforms, which in some ways are superior to US social media platforms, but they do different things. But, obviously in China, you have, what do you have, like 4 times as many people, and stuff can go viral incredibly fast. And yeah, so they were mostly about that, mostly about marketing, mostly about AI, generative AI, a little bit on large language models as well. So kind of like Perplexity and ChatGPT.
One last question. If there's one thing that you enjoy most about writing, whether it be novels, screenplays, nonfiction books, or columns, what is it?
Novels. I think the screenplays are fun, but screenplays have that added element of you always have to wonder how you're going to get this made, And when I first started writing screenplays, my second script was like a quarterfinalist for the Zoetrope screenplay competition, which is run by Zoetrope, the famous Francis Ford Coppola. But then I kind of didn't apply to any more festivals for about 10 years. And then I started again a couple of years ago with the Dead Chip Syndicate. And it was just extraordinary how many film festivals there are out there, screenplay competitions, and it was just too much. It's like, and it costs a few bucks. I ended up winning quite a few, but it didn't really help with getting the book noticed or getting the screenplays noticed or made. And then, but books are basically, there's a level of freedom there where obviously it's quite structured. When you're writing a thriller, you have to do certain things that the audience is going to expect. But I took things that happened in my life and read a lot about. I'm a twin, and the book is about a twin. And I read about there's an interesting history of twins that have killed each other. There aren't that many. But or got in some kind of trouble regarding that. So and then just the way, like one of the things that got me to write the book was I was flying into Manila, and I remember the name of the airport was the Ninoy Aquino Airport. And then I remembered, that's the guy who died there. He was murdered on the tarmac. And then I just kind of was like, I got to come up with an idea for that, because it's I thought it would be a great opening line for a book. So basically it became an opening line. It was like, through a dark bank of swirling gray clouds, the flickering lights of Manila's Ninoy Aquino Airport came into view. The sight gave Anthony Wilson little relief, because he knew it was the one airport in the world named after someone murdered on his tarmac, and he feared a similar fate awaited him there too. And I kind of wrote that line, put it up. Actually, there's this website or YouTube channel that it's called First Line Frenzy. So I put that up, and they actually chose it, and they read it, they commented on it. But it was something that I saw in my life, and I was like, that would be a great beginning of a thriller. And then, I took that little thing and I thought, just have the main character. He's landing in Manila, and he's fearful for his life. And then I just kind of built the story around that. And I think it turned out really well. It was like, honestly, I think it was for me, the most gratifying thing that I've ever done, because as someone who struggled so much to get a film made, it was really a pleasure to find a publisher who believed in me. And a lot of people were reading, I joined a community online, and it was a wonderful community called Critique Circle. So you're putting up a chapter, and then you're reading other people's chapters and giving them comments. So it's a wonderful community, and we got a book out of it. So it's been a pleasure. I think, and just the freedom really to write anything you want. I mean, I'm writing a sequel to this called Quid Pro Crypto, and I'm writing another story called The Fair Sex, which is about a feminist who gets involved with a men's rights activist in LA. So it's like you just have this freedom, and you don't have to worry about raising $10 million, $20 million for a movie. And it's just And the beauty now is like if you can't find a publisher, you can publish it yourself. So it's really on you and your talent, whether you will succeed or not.
Andrew, thank you for appearing on Apollo Papyrus. You were an amazing guest.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. It was a real pleasure.
It was fascinating to interview Andrew, and I hope to read some of his books soon. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to write and read your purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2024, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited, except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.